In this guide, we are going to be teaching you the best way to dominate the map in low elo with macro tactics that are guaranteed to work every single game. Now, if you've ever watched a challenger player smurfing in your elo and making it look extremely easy, then you've probably had the thought at some point or another that their opponents, they don't look nearly as competent as what you go up against. The same players in your elo, they look terrible compared to them, and that is for one simple reason. Great players don't just mechanically outplay their opponents, but they control the pace of the game, so everyone looks like a headless chicken when they're playing against them. And that is the sole reason we want to teach you everything that is in this guide, the macro strategies that challengers actually use to make every low elo player look completely clueless. Now, to start, the most important thing to understand about macro is that it almost always revolves around one singular concept: pushing waves into your opponent's tower, or at least as close as you can get to it. Now, this is the foundation of almost every single macro decision, whether it's warding, whether it's objectives, team fighting, and so on. It all begins with a pushed wave. But why though? Well, if you think about it, the point of macro is to get consistent results in solo queue. By pushing a wave into your opponent's tower, you're forcing them to respond in a particular way, which makes games a whole lot more predictable and a whole lot more controllable. The first decision your opponents are going to have to make is whether they're going to go kill that wave or not. Minions are worth gold and experience, and if they don't collect that wave, they're going to miss that entire value. So they either go farm the wave and force themselves into one single area of the map, or they ignore it and completely miss out on crucial resources. Not only is missing resources going to be a threat, but a minion wave also represents the opportunity for you to attack that tower. So if they go do something else, then you can also threaten to push in and potentially take towers because they disregarded the minion wave. Almost every single macro decision you can possibly make should always begin with you thinking about a minion wave. Now, there is a reason that even during an incredibly tense team fight, that a game analyst, they're typically going to immediately look at and discuss minions first.
They're gonna lose a bot wave here. Like, look at this. You're fighting Herald, and look at that bleeding bot wave. Look at that bleeding mid wave. Nothing is ever good. You're always losing gold on every play.
Now, obviously, that's professional play, where team-based macro is going to be wildly different from your own. Because let's be real, your solo queue teammates can't even group with Baron, let alone play around waves before it. So when you hear the same old advice, like just push waves before an objective, bro, you already know that's not going to work for you. And we get that, which is exactly why we work together with Coach Rogue to put together 3 brand new courses, including one fully dedicated to macro, taking these same high elo strategies and showing you how to actually apply them in your elo. Because at Skill Capped, we don't just teach you what's correct to do in theory, we focus on teaching you what actually works in your games, at your rank, with your teammates. And we're so confident in that we backed it up for over a decade, as if you don't climb at least 5 divisions while actively using our service, you get every penny back, no questions asked. So click the link in the description below to gain access to a special one-time discount and get the rank that you have always wanted this season. So now that you understand the importance of waves to macro, let's talk about the first step to controlling the map as much as you possibly can in solo queue. Now, ideally, what you and your team should strive to do is push in all 3 lanes constantly. There's a couple of benefits to this. The first is the obvious and most important one. You don't want to share farm with your other teammates. Top, mid, and ADC should all be farming a lane of their own most of the time to get as strong as possible. The second benefit is that the more waves your team pushes in, the more likely it is that your opponents make a mistake. Maybe the enemy players in top and mid are covering the pushed waves properly, but if just one single person messes up and maybe leaves a lane alone when they shouldn't have, they could suffer some massive consequences, which can give your team a huge advantage. So the goal is to push 3 lanes to spread farm amongst your team and to make it way more likely your opponents make a macro mistake, because you're putting pressure in so many different areas of the map. Now, this is where most guides, including ours, will tell you about ideal lane assignments. Now, the way that the advice goes is typically that the ADC and support should all stay mid. Then the player with teleport should play on the opposite side of the upcoming objective. For example, if top has teleport and Baron is the current most important objective, they should be the one pushing bottom, ready to TP to the fight. And that would leave the mid laner to catch top, where they can quickly rotate to join the fight at Baron. Now, while it is good to understand what should be happening in solo queue, you need to be flexible, especially in the lower brackets where it's unlikely that you're going to be in proper lane states all the time. For example, here we have a Kog'Maw who's one lane. Normally, as an ADC, you'd transition to mid lane now and you'd swap your mid laner down to bot. But the Renekton laning in mid doesn't want to swap, even though it would benefit him to do so. Sometimes your teammates, they're going to be stubborn. They're human after all. They're tilted maybe at how the game's going or whatever it is. Solo queue is always going going to be super random due to the variety of teammates that you're really going to get. You can complain about it, or you can just do what Kog'Maw did and simply just go to bottom instead. This is the #1 guideline that you want to keep in mind at all times in regards to your macro. Don't overthink proper lane assignments. As long as you can push out a wave to around here, a little past the halfway point in lane, and put even just a little bit of pressure, you can be in charge of the side lane even as an ADC. Lane assignments aren't nearly as important as simply having 3 lanes being properly farmed and pushed out most of the time. Okay, enough of that though. Push. But what happens now? What do you do after you've pushed a wave into the opponent's side of the map? That brings us to the most basic, most common, but also one of the most effective macro strategies in the entire game: the push and rotate. After pushing, you just head on over to where the rest of your teammates are and you try to make a play with a numbers advantage. Remember, this is because someone on the enemy team is currently stuck farming the wave that you pushed into their towers. So you've got a 1-person advantage over the enemy just for a little bit, which you should honestly take full advantage of. Now, while the push and rotate is a very simple macro play, it is extremely effective, especially if you understand a couple of key concepts to take full advantage of it. First, you have to remember as you make your play that you're on a timer here. Technically, what should happen is that while you're grouping with your team, the enemy who is stuck catching the wave now pushes it to your tower, and then they get their own chance to rotate to their team. Technically, this is kind of called taking turns. You rotate, make a play with your team, then they push the wave into your tower, so now it's their turn to make a play, then you get to make a play again, and so on and so forth. Now, that's not necessarily how to go in solo queue most of the time. We all get that, but understanding the idea is important here. All you need to remember is that you're on a timer to get back to catch the wave that they're pushing into your tower. Just make sure you don't group for too long though. As soon as you see the wave getting close to your tower, you really need to head back before you miss too many minions. An important tip to make this favor you though is to remember that the more you push a wave out, then the more time you're going to have to group up with your team. For example, Set just pushed a wave pretty deep into the enemy side of the map. Then he bases and teleports to bottom to dive the enemy duo to score a bunch of kills for his team. All the while, Malphite was trying to push the wave back into Set's tower as we just discussed. But since Set initially pushed it so far into Malphite's side of the map, he had all the time in the world to make the play, base, and then run back to top before the wave had even gotten to his tower. This process is precisely how good players win games so dang consistently. Instead of making random plays, they follow these simple concepts to maximize their farm and map pressure all at the same time. Now, one final thing to talk about here is the elephant in the room. What do you do if your opponents just don't catch the wave? What if they just follow you as you rotate across the map to your team? This is pretty straightforward here. You don't have to do anything. Remember, missing a whole wave is a ton of gold and experience lost. So if you do nothing, you're getting ahead for free. However, just keep in mind that the relative value of waves does go down as the game goes on. A minion wave at level 9 is worth way more than a wave at level 17, for example. So your opponent's missing waves at around 15 minutes or so is going to be a huge win. But a single wave really isn't worth that much later into the game. Now, that being said, as the value of waves does go down, their threat to enemy towers goes up. As you get more and more items, most champions can begin deleting enemy towers in just a few seconds. And this is why pushing waves is relevant at all stages of the game. Early on, it's more about threatening to deny resources. Later into the match, it becomes more about threatening the enemy base instead. You can do a ton of damage with just one minion wave, which all brings us to our next macro strategy, split pushing. Everyone knows that champions like Jax, Tryndamere, or Fiora are the side lane monsters of this game. But any champion with good wave clear and tower damage can split push, even ADCs, in the right circumstances, of course. So let's talk about some guidelines to make your split pushing way more consistent so you know how and when to do it. First things first, let's say you've pushed a side lane wave and you've noticed no one is going to be here to defend the tower. So you have a choice. Do you rotate to your team like we discussed before, or do you stay and you hit the tower? Here's a simple way to make that decision. Remember that towers provide absolutely no value to you unless you completely destroy them. Turret plates, they aren't a thing after 14 minutes. So doing half a tower's HP, it's going to be pointless for the most part. Now, on the other hand, towers do provide a ton of gold if you do manage to destroy it. So just ask yourself that question if you see no one defending it. Can I take this before someone gets here to defend? If yes, stay and get the tower. If not, rotate to your team. In this particular situation here, that decision might seem a little bit weird because the enemy team is pushing so aggressively. But keep in mind that your teammates, they are way more likely to play well if they see you taking a tower for free. So for example, Anivia Zyra knows that if she just clears this wave right here, they're going to come out ahead because Anivia is taking the bot lane tower uncontested. Split pushing always carries a risk though, because you're not with your teammates, so they might all die and then blame you for not grouping. But that's a pretty dangerous mindset to have. You definitely shouldn't play in fear that if your teammates mess up, it's going to be all your fault because you left them alone. They're in the same elo bracket that you are. They want to win, and they are just as likely to play well as they are to die. Don't base your decisions on what they might or might not do. However, you do want to think about what your teammates can do with the pressure you put on by splitting. This is a concept that we delve really deep into over at our site.
Let's start off our section on the mid game with probably the best concept I ever came up with, and that's the idea of tempo line. Tempo lines is essentially a tool you can use in the mid game in order to see where to go and what to do in an attempt to better sync up with your teammates. And it is by far the most realistic way to play when you're playing in solo queue, especially in lower elos where your teammates are crazy.
Again, if you want to truly master the concepts we're teaching in this guide, you should definitely check out our full courses using the link below. And that's because understanding these types of concepts can allow you to make macro calls that no one else is going to be making in your elo. For example, here we have a fed Orianna pushing top. Now, if you ask most low elo players, they're going to tell you that she probably shouldn't sit there and hit the tower. That's because she's an immobile mage with no vision deep on the enemy side of the map. But Orianna knows better here and is actively thinking about what her own team is capable of rather than just focusing on her own safety. Right now, with Dragon and Otacon being contestable objectives, she's putting the enemy team into a super uncomfortable situation by pushing this tower. They either go contest the objectives, letting her get the tower for free, or they try to collapse on her instead. By considering her own teammates' positions on the map, Orianna has instantly won the game in a single move. The enemy team felt pressured to send multiple people to defend versus her, letting the rest of the team secure 2 major objectives completely for free without even needing to a random team fight. Now, as you can clearly see, all good macro begins with a pushed wave, which gives you options for how to play the map, while at the same time, it makes your opponent's options predictable, which might be some of the concern here if you're playing a role that doesn't have the option to constantly push, like supports and junglers. These 2 roles obviously can't just sit in a lane and push like the other 3 can, but that doesn't mean everything you've learned thus far is pointless. Your goal is to just instead help your teammates with their pushing if needed, or to get more value out of their wave crashes in general. Here's a really good example of what we mean. Here we have Janna pathing towards mid and pushing up really aggressively, looking to zone the enemy team while also providing vision in the area. Then she hovers Jhin for a bit to make sure he can push and crash this wave into the tower, as we just discussed this entire time. Your goal as a jungler and/or support is to create a bridge from one pushing lane to another. What you want to do is hover that area, place in vision, or just contesting the enemy team from entering. This way, you connect 2 pushing lanes to each other. In doing so, think about how that helps your pushing teammates. For starters, it allows them to push and roam way more effectively with all the vision in the area. One player could go mid or the other could go to bottom really easily without fear of dying randomly in the jungle as they rotate. So back to our real example here. As you can see, Morgana and Janna are currently creating that same bridge between mid and top. This bridge also lets you quickly react to the pressure your teammates are creating. Because there's only a level 8 Zed defending versus Aatrox, Morgana and Janna take the initiative to cut him off from retreating back to his base. And then they eventually kill the Zed and take the tower to boot, all thanks to our bridge concept. Now, of course, there is one final concern that you might have when it comes to macro. What if you and your team just can't push the wave? In 50% of the games you play, you are obviously going to be on the losing team, so you may not be able to actually pressure the enemy team if they're the ones pushing waves into your towers. Now, we can't cover every single detail for playing from behind here, but let's try to cover some major insights that should help you try to mount a comeback. First, let me be the first to say that although losing absolutely sucks in League, there is a weird advantage that comes from your team being on the back foot. As your team loses towers and are forced further into your own base, the area of the map you're in charge of begins to shrink. On the other hand, your opponent's zone of influence grows larger and larger. That might sound bad, but it's actually kind of good for you. It means that since your team has less of the area to play in, that you'll be more tightly packed in, letting you rotate to each other a whole lot more quickly since you have less ground to cover. This often results in your team having a numbers advantage simply by virtue of always being so close to each other. The winning team is usually going to have someone far away doing something else, giving you a chance to potentially try to come back by fighting with more numbers. There's no guarantees when playing from behind, but it is an advantage that you have to consider. Another potential mistake that your opponents might make when ahead is that players tend to overgroup to secure objectives. Now, what we mean by this is that you typically don't need all 5 players if you're winning to secure something on the map. You only need 3 or 4, while the others defend other areas. A huge mistake many lower elo players make is trying to contest something when they can't fight their stronger opponents anyway. Notice how all 5 of of the blue team's players are in this area taking Otacon. One of the best tactics for coming back in games like these is known as cross-mapping. Basically, this just means that while your opponents take something on one side of the map, that you take something somewhere else on the map. Now, players usually think that you need to cross-map something big for it to be worth it. Like in this game, there's no other objective or tower for the red team to take while the blue side takes Otacon, but there's waves and jungle camp spawning that they could contest instead. You don't need a big cross-map to be effective. At the very least, you should trade something on the map, even if it is a small trade, rather than just walking in to die, falling even further behind. And all of that is going to wrap up what we have time to cover in this single video. But as we've mentioned, if you want to learn all the intricacies of macro, then all you need to do is sign up to Skillcapped with the link below. Anyway, thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.